The Indian struggle by Subhash Chandra was Part-16. Mahatma Gandhi in Europe, 1931. Dressed in loin cloth and sandals and with but a shawl to protect him from the inclement weather, the Mahatma landed in Marseille on September 11, 1931. A select group of British and Indian friends and admirers met him there and accompanied him to London. On arriving there, he was taken straight to a reception at the friend's house. In reply to the address of welcome referring to the British government, he humorously remarked, quote, "You cannot honestly balance the budget without first balancing the relations between the India and England," unquote. The writer was one of those who at one time felt misgivings as to whether the Mahatma would be well advised to visit Europe in his characteristic loin cloth. On his former visits to Europe, he was of course clothed differently, but on this occasion, he did the right thing in adhering to his favorite dress. Questioned by a reporter about his dress, the Mahatma once jokingly remarked, quote, "You people wear plus fours, mine are minus fours." Then changing to a more serious vein, he said, quote, "If I came here to live and work like an English citizen, then I should conform to the customs of the country and should wear the dress of an Englishman. But I am here on a great and special mission, and my loin cloth, if you choose so to describe it, is the dress of my principles, the people of India," unquote. His countrymen today feel proud that he stuck to the dress of his principles and even attended the Buckingham Palace party in the same dress. During his stay in London between September 12th and December 1st, the Mahatma spoke 12 times at the Round Table Conference, twice before the plenary session of the conference on November 30th and December 1st, 8 times before the Federal Structure Committee and twice before the Minorities Committee. In his Maidan speech before the Federal Structure Committee on September 15th, 1931, he explained the position of the Indian National Congress and the mandate given by the Karachi Congress and went on to say, quote, "Time was when I prided myself on being called a British subject. I have ceased for many years to call myself a British subject. I would far rather be called a rebel than a subject. But I have now aspired and I still aspire to be a citizen, not in the empire but in a commonwealth, in a partnership if possible. If God wills it, an indissoluble partnership but not a partnership superimposed upon one nation by another," unquote. It is clear from this speech that in spite of the Lahore Resolution on Independence, the Mahatma was striving for a settlement with Britain on the basis of dominion status. In the press interview which the Mahatma had granted on board SS Rajputana, it was evident that he was full of optimism. But before the second meeting of the Federal Structure Committee, which took place on September 17th, disillusionment began to creep in. He began to realize of what stuff the members of the Round Table Conference were made. Therefore, at the outset of his speech on the 17th, he said, quote, "I have endeavored to study as I had not done before the list of the delegates, and the first feeling of oppression that has been coming upon me is that we are not the chosen ones of the nation which we should be representing, but we are chosen ones of the government. Furthermore, knowing well the different parties and groups in India from experience, as I study the list of delegates, I see some very noticeable gaps, and so I am oppressed with a sense of unreality in connection with our composition," unquote. The Mahatma began to see through the game of the British politicians. Hence, in order to turn the tables on them, he called upon them to make a concrete proposal. In reply to that move, the government sought to turn the tables on him by summoning the Minorities Committee, which would form the battleground for the Indian delegates. In the same meeting, replying to an attack leveled against the Congress, the Mahatma said, quote, "Though the government of the day has accused us of an insolently setting up a parallel government, I would like to subscribe to that charge in my own fashion. Though we have not set up any parallel government, we certainly aspire some day or other to displace the existing government and in due course, in the course of evolution, also to take charge of that government," unquote. Mahatma Gandhi's first speech before the Minority Committee was delivered on 8th October 1931. The apprehension that he had hinted at on September 17th had been realized by then, and all attempts to arrive at a settlement of the communal question had ended in failure. No wonder when the members were the chosen ones of government. This result had been clearly indicated in the manifesto issued by the writer and others in opposition to the leaders. Delhi Manifesto in November 1929. On October 8th, 1931, the Mahatma said, quote, "It is with deep sorrow and deeper humiliation that I have to announce utter failure on my part to secure an agreed solution of the communal question through informal conversation among and with the representatives of different groups, but to say that the conservations have to our utter shame felt is not to say the whole truth. Causes of failure were inherent in the composition of the Indian delegation. We are almost all not elected representatives of the parties and or groups we are presumed to represent. We are here by nomination of the government, nor are those whose presence was absolutely necessary for an agreed solution to be found here. Further, you will allow me to say that this was hardly the time to summon the Minorities Committee. It lacks the sense of reality in that we do not know what it is that we are going to get. I therefore venture the suggest that the Minority committee be adjourned Sunday and that the fundamentals of the constitution be hammered into shape as quickly as possible. Should all efforts at agreement fail even when the round table conference reaches the end of its labors, I would suggest the addition of a clause to the expected constitution appointing a judicial tribunal that would examine all claims and give its final decision on all the points that may be left unsettled. Going through this speech, one cannot help thinking what a change it would have made if the Mahatma had come to London with a full contingent of nationalist representatives of Muslims and other minority committees to counteract the mischievous moves of the chosen ones of the government. It is also to be regretted that despite the warning he had received at Delhi soon after the Karachi Congress, the Mahatma did not realize that the main function of the minorities committee would be to create confusion among the Indian members and shelve the main political issues. It was certainly another blunder for Mahatma to suggest a judicial tribunal which would of course be appointed by the British government and would in all probability have produced the same document as the Prime Minister's communal award. If the British government had taken the Mahatma at his word and appointed a judicial tribunal, what would have been Mahatma's position today? Before the next meeting of the minorities committee was held in November 13, 1931, an interesting development had taken place. The so-called representatives of the minority committees had concluded a pact among themselves as a solution of the communal question. This pact, called the Minority Pact, vouchsafed to them a very large share of the loaves and fishes of the constitution. The pact was made with the full approval of the government of India, and the British members of the conference coming from ever joined this pact. Before entering into this pact, Dr. Ambedkar, the nominated representative of the depressed classes, wanted a number of seats would be reserved in the legislatures for the depressed classes on the basis of common electorate for all the section of the Hindus. At that time, the Mahatma would not think of any such compromise. When Dr. Ambedkar joined the minorities pact, he was assured not only of a number of seats for depressed classes but also of a separate electorate for them. There is no doubt that if a settlement had been made with the Dr. Ambedkar, the terms would have been much better than the terms of the Pune Pact concluded in September 1932. After the historic fast of the Mahatma at the meeting of the minorities committee held on November 13, 1931, the chairman Mr. Ramsay MacDonald, referring to the minorities pact, claimed that it was acceptable to well over 115 million people in India. He also replied to the Mahatma's attack at the previous meeting and urged on the contrary that inability to solve the communal question was hampering the progress of constitution building. In his speech, the Mahatma emphatically challenged both this assertion and with reference to the first, he claimed that the Congress represented 85% of the population not merely of British India but of the whole of India. In the same speech, the Mahatma made one significant assertion, quote, I would like to repeat what I have said before, that while it will always accept any solution that may be acceptable to the Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs, the Congress will be no party to special reservation or special electorates for any other minorities. The Mahatma once again urged the appointment by the government of a judicial tribunal to give a final decision on the communal question. Before the Federal Structure Committee on October 23, 1931, Mahatma Gandhi put forward with the due emphasis the Congress view regarding a Supreme Court for India. He urged that this federal court should be a court of the widest jurisdiction possible and not to decide only those cases that arise from the administration of federal laws. He opposed the idea of having two Supreme Courts, one to deal merely with the federal law and the other to deal with all the other matters not covered by the federal administration or the federal government. On November 17, 1931, the Mahatma spoke on the Congress demand for complete control over the army and external affairs. He said that the present army, whether Indian or British, was an army of occupation. Quote, I would say emphatically that the whole of this army should be disbanded if it does not pass under my control before I could possibly shoulder the burden of running the government of India under the terrible handicaps under which we are laboring as a legacy of alien rule. If the British people think that we shall require a century before that can be done, then for that century the Congress will wander in the wilderness and the Congress must go through that terrible fiery ordeal. And if it becomes necessary and if it is God's will, a shower of bullets. Unquote. On November 19, 1931, before the Federal Structure Committee, the Mahatma opposed the resolution on commercial safeguards for Britishers passed by the first roundtable conference on being detrimental to the interest of the Indian people. He agreed that there should be no racial discrimination against the foreigners as such. He also agreed that no existing interest legitimately acquired and not being in conflict with the best interest of the nation in general shall be interfered with except in accordance with the law applicable to such interest. But he made it clear that the national government of the future might find it necessary to dispose the haves in the interest of the have-nots, that is, famished millions of India. Existing interest should be subjected to judicial scrutiny when necessary, but no racial question would be involved therein. He further opposed the existing rights of the European community in India in regard to criminal trials. In his next speech at the Round Table Conference on November 25th, he maintained that the obligations to be taken over by the future national government of India should be subject to audit and impartial examination. He condemned the fixing of the currency ratio at 1:6 instead of 1:4, as the Indian people had demanded. Continuing, he said, quote, I would want complete control of Indian finance if India was really to have responsibility to at the center. In my opinion, unless we have control over our own purse, absolutely unrestricted, we shall not be able to shoulder the responsibility, nor will it be a responsibility worth the name. Unquote. In another speech the same day, he maintained that the mature consideration he had come to the conclusion that provincial autonomy and central responsibility must go together. Quote, a strong center governed and administered by an alien authority and a strong autonomy are a contradiction in terms. Unquote. Speaking of central responsibility, he said, quote, I want that responsibility at the center that will give me, as you all know, control of the army and finance. I know that I am not going to get that here and now, and I know there is not a British man ready for that. Therefore, I know I must go back and yet invite the nation to a course of suffering. Mahatma Gandhi, unquote. Mahatma Gandhi's first speech at the plenary session of the Round Table Conference on November 30th is a priceless document, though it affords painful reading, being a record of delusionment complete. He started by saying, quote, all the other parties at this meeting represent sectional interest. The Congress alone claims to represent the whole of India and all interest. And yet here I see that the Congress is treated as one of the parties. I wish I could convince all the British public men, the British members, that the Congress is capable of delivering the goods. But no, although you have invited the Congress, you distrust the Congress. Although you have invited the Congress, you reject its claim to represent the whole of India. Referring to the communal question, he told the unpleasant truth, quote, that so long as the wedge in the shape of a foreign rule divides community from community and class from class, there will be no real living solution. There will be no living friendship between these communities. Unquote. On the question of a national demand, he said, quote, call it by any name you like. A rose will smell as sweet by any other name, but it must be the rose of liberty that I want and not the artificial product. Unquote. Then in order to soften his demand for independence, he appealed in these words, quote, I want to become a partner with the English people, but I want to enjoy pricelessly the same liberty that your people enjoy, and I want to seek this partnership not merely for India and not merely for mutual benefit. Unquote. Then finding that all appeals were useless, he flared up and said, will you not see the writing that these terrorists are writing with their bloods? Question mark. Unquote. Then he said, quote, I shall hope against hope. I shall strain every nerve to achieve an honorable settlement for my country. It can be matter of no joy and comfort to me to lead them again to fight of that character. But if a further ordeal of fire has to be our lot, I shall approach that with the greatest joy and with the greatest consolation that I was doing what I felt to be right, that the country was doing what it felt to be right. Unquote. At the last sitting of the plenary session of the Round Table Conference on December 1st, 1931, the Prime Minister, Mr. Ramsay MacDonald, made the following declaration. Quote, at the beginning of the year 1931, I made a declaration of the policy of then government, and I am authorized by the present one to give you and India specific assurance that it remains its policy. I shall repeat the salient sentences of that declaration. Quote, the view of His Majesty's government is that responsibility for the government of India should be placed upon the legislatures, central and provincial, with such provinces as may be necessary to guarantee during the period of transition the observance of certain obligations and to meet other special circumstances, and also with such guarantees as are required by the minorities to protect their political rights in such statutory safeguards as may be made for meeting the needs of the transitional period. It will be the primary concern of His Majesty's government to see the reserved powers so framed and exercised as not to prejudice and advance of India through the new constitution to full responsibility for her own government. Quote, regarding the central government, it made it plan that subject to defined conditions, His Majesty's late government was prepared to recognize the principle of responsibility of the executive to the legislature if both were constituted on an all India federal basis. The principle of responsibility was to be subject to the qualification that in the existing circumstances defense and external affairs must be reserved to the Governor General, and that regarding finance such conditions must apply as would ensure the fulfillment of the obligations incurred under the authority of the Secretary of State for India and the maintenance unimpaired of the financial stability and credit of India. Quote, finally, it was our view that the Governor General must be granted the necessary powers to enable him to fulfill his responsibility for securing the observance of the constitutional rights of the minority and for ultimately maintaining the tranquility of the state. Unquote. Moving a vote of thanks to the Premier, the Mahatma said that in all probability he had come to the parting of the ways, but he hoped that if a fight was unavoidable, it would be conducted without malice on either side. 3 days later, the Mahatma said goodbye to the Premier and left London. Before leaving London, in an interview to the press, he stated that an immediate nationwide resumption of civil disobedience was out of question, but he did foresee the possibility of local civil disobedience being launched as a protest against specific acts of injustice and tyranny, as for example the ordinances promulgated in Bengal, the United Provinces and the Frontier Province. During his stay of nearly 3 months in England, the Mahatma had an exceedingly busy time. A glance at his daily routine would show that he was overstraining himself, sometimes not allowing himself to have more than 2 hours sleep for days together. He met all sorts of people there: MPs, politicians, journalists, missionaries, society ladies, social workers, literatures, artists, students, and what not. During weekends, he would undertake tours to Cambridge or Oxford or Lancashire in order to awaken interest in and sympathy for India, but it seems that there was lack of coordination and unity of purpose in all his activities. Indian members of the Round Table Conference complained that it was difficult difficult to get the Mahatma when they wanted him. Indian liberal members of the Round Table Conference complained that instead of playing an lone hand, he could have rallied all the anti-communal forces and become the leader of a united nationalist party. Whenever the truth of this criticism may be, there is no doubt that the Mahatma's visit to England was badly planned, if there was any plan at all, and his personal entourage did not consist of any advisors worth the name. His indecision till the 11th hour about attending the London conference was largely responsible for his lack of plan and for his late arrival in London, which considerably handicapped him. As contrasted with him, the government had made elaborate arrangements and all their plans had been carefully worked out in advance. It was only in London that he realized that what it meant to have a conference with members chosen by the government, with the Congress as one of the several parties present there and with himself as the only representative of the Congress. The wonder of it is that such a shrewd politician as the Mahatma made such a belated discovery in spite of the warnings given by the lesser folks in India. But the causes of the Mahatma's failure in London to go so much deeper. If the Mahatma meant to cooperate with the Round Table Conference, he should have gone there in 1930. The terms which he got in March 1931, he could have easily got in August 1930. The assurance regarding dominion status which he had demanded in 1929 and 1930, he could not get even in 1931. As for the other concessions in the Gandhi-Irvin Pact, Lord Irvin would in all probability have agreed to them at any time. In 1930, the Congress could easily have got half the number of seats at the conference. But going there in 1931 alone and unfriended, the Mahatma had the tactical disadvantage of having to meet a conference which had come into existence without the participation of the Congress and of having to build on sectarian foundations led by communist members. With the Labour cabinet in power in England in 1930 and Lord Irvin in Delhi, the Congress could have given a different turn to the conference. In 1931, the situation was altered completely. The Labour cabinet was replaced by a virtually conservative cabinet. Lord Irvin made room for Lord Wellington, while Sir Samuel Orr succeeded Captain Vangerwood Ben at the India Office. The last flickering hope died out when the general election in October brought the Conservatives into power with the thumping majority. In spite of these unfavorable circumstances, when the Mahatma did go to England, he should have concentrated entirely on the work of the conference, with a view to counteracting all the mischievous moves of the government. Probably under the influence of pro-Indian Britishers like Mr. C.F. Andrews, he unfortunately took into his head that he should go about rousing sympathy for India among Britishers. That was not purpose for which he had come to England, nor was it possible for him to do so within the short time and with the limited energy at his disposal. Going over the list of a person whom the Mahatma met, one cannot help feeling that for the purpose for which he had come to England, most of the engagements were unnecessary, if not useless. If he had come on an ordinary propaganda tour, a program such as he had would have been quite helpful and in order. There was another deeper cause which accounted for the Mahatma's failure. During his stay in England, he had to play two roles in one person, the role of a political leader and that of a world teacher. Sometimes he conducted himself not as a political leader who had come to negotiate with the enemy, but as a master who had come to preach a new faith, that of non-violent and world peace. Because of his second role, he had to spend much of his time with the people who were quite useless in promoting his political mission. In the absence of advisors from his own party, the place was filled by some of his British admirers. From the moment of his landing in Europe till the moment of his departure, he was surrounded by them. In order to demonstrate his fairness and universal love, he accepted as his hostess an English lady. As contrasted with the Mahatma, the Irish Sinn Féin delegation to London in 1921 had lived a different life. They used to live entirely among themselves and avoid all social engagements with the Britishers. Though attempts were made to drag the delegation into them, this aloofness and indifference had impressed the British politician much more than the Mahatma's friendliness did. But being a world leader, the Mahatma had his own code of ethics. There is no doubt that in 1930, when the Mahatma was in prison, he had exerted a much greater influence on the Round Table Conference. At the conference, the Indian liberal politicians had fully exploited his influence. But when he appeared in person and all alone, he lost much of the glamour and the halo that had attached to his name. He was at a physical disadvantage, being a single frail individual in a group of 107. If he had accepted the offer made by the government of 15 or 16 seats for the Congress delegation, his position would have been stronger. His colleagues would have been of great help to him in meeting and crossing swords with a solid phalanx of reactionaries. Moreover, the Mahatma did not seem to be cut out for the role of a bargainer. He therefore met the fate which overtook President Wilson at the time of the Versailles Treaty. The Professor President of America was no match for the Welsh wizard Mr. Lloyd George, nor was the saint politician from India any match for the wily Mr. Ramsay MacDonald. On the British side, the Mahatma was handled very tactfully. He had on the whole of a very friendly welcome in England, which he recognized publicly before he left the country. Special facilities were afforded him while moving about in London. On the plea of guarding his person, two stalwarts from Scotland Yard were detailed to be near him to so that a thing about his daily routine and engagements. I have not been able to understand why the Mahatma accepted this escort from the Scotland Yard. If an escort was really necessary, his numerous admirers and followers in London could have easily served the purpose. It has been already remarked that the last hope of a settlement faded away when the Conservatives were returned to power. Their elimination of the Indian situation as also of the Indian leader was quite different from that of the Labourists. His goodness, his frankness, his humbleness, humble ways, his profound consideration for his opponents not only did not impress John Bullock but was construed as a weakness. His habit of putting all his cards on the table was all right for India and the Indians, but damaged his prestige among the British politicians. His proneness to confess his ignorance on an intricate question of finance or law would have been all right in the company of the truth-seeking philosophers, but lowered him in the estimation of the British public, who were accustomed to see their leaders looking more wise than they really were. He repeated offer of a wholehearted cooperation at the Round Table Conference had a most tragic effect and made them think Gandhi is on his last legs. What impression could such a statement make on a veteran politician in England? I shall be here as long as I am required because I do not want to revive civil disobedience. I want to turn the truce that was arrived at Delhi into permanent settlement. But for heaven's sake, give me a frail man, 62 years gone, a little bit of chance, find a little corner for him and the organization that he represents. If on the contrary, the Mahatma had spoken in the language of dictator Stalin or second Druss Mussolini or fucker Hitler, John Paul, who would have understood and would have bowed his head in respect. As it was, the conservative politician began to think, is this frail man in loincloth so formidable that the powerful British government should yield to him? India was being ruled by a man who was fit to be bishop, and so we had so much trouble. If only we had a strong man at Delhi and at the India office, everything would be all right. This is how the Indian situation was summed up after the general election of October 1931, and his propaganda among the church dignitaries, professors and cranks was of no use to India. The secret of political bargaining is to look more strong than you really are. Indian politicians, if they want to match themselves successfully against their British opponents, will have to learn many things which they do not know and unlearn many things which they have learnt. Going through the speeches of the Mahatma at the Round Table Conference, one is painted at every step that from the very beginning he had to speak at length on the status of Congress as contrasted with other parties and had to repeat his remarks over and over again. Only shows that a conspiracy had been hatched in advance to ignore the Congress completely. At the conference, the Mahatma remarked that in the reports submitted by the different committees, the views of the so-called majority were given prominence, while his dissented note was condemned to insignificance, as if it reflected the opinion of just one individual. Some weeks after his arrival in London, the Mahatma did realize the hopelessness of the situation. If he had any political diplomacy, he should have sought a convenient opportunity of getting out of the conference as soon as possible, and then should have made an extensive tour in America and on the continent to expose the unreality of the conference and to popularize the Indian cause. By sticking to the conference till the end, he unnecessarily lent prestige to a body that should have been exposed before the bar of the world opinion. The Mahatma, after leaving England, spent a few days in Paris. There he had a group of friends and admirers who were, however, more interested in the non-violence as a message to the world than in his struggle for India's freedom. His brief stay in Paris was well utilized, but unfortunately, no attempt was made to get into touch with the politicians or with the people who really count in the modern political world, nor was any attempt made by him to raise the Indian issue as an international political issue. From Paris, he went to Geneva. There also he had a group of friends, and many of whom were interested in his philosophy than in his politics. Though he visited Geneva, no serious attempt was made to bring him into the touch with the people who count in the organization of the League of Nations. He paid a visit to the International Labour Office, and that was about all. However, the most useful part of his time in the Switzerland was spent in the company of that great man and thinker, the great friend of India and India's culture, Mr. Romain Ronald. India today has not a warmer friend outside her shores than his great soul, and therefore the Mahatma rendered a great public service to India by spending some of his time in the company of the French servant. From Switzerland to the Mahatma travelled to Italy. He was given a warm reception by the government and the people of Italy, and was received in audience by the head of the government, Chandra Mussolini. That meeting was certainly an historic one. The dictator of Italy conveyed his best wishes for the success of the Mahatma's efforts. It was the only occasion on the continent that the Mahatma came into contact with a man who really counts in the politics of modern Europe. The Mahatma's attitude towards the fascist authorities, including the attendance at a demonstration of the fascist boys, was severely criticized in anti-fascist circles. But there is no doubt that from the point of view of India, the Mahatma rendered great public service by his visit to Italy. The only regret is that he did not stay there longer and did not cultivate more personal contacts. Reviewing the Mahatma's visit to Europe as a whole, one must say that it is to be regretted that he spent so much of his time in England and so little on the continent. Even on the continent, he did not devote sufficient time or attention to politicians, industrial magnates, and other people who really count in the present day politics. There were many countries on the continent eagerly expecting to a visit from him, and where he would have received a most cordial reception. If he had desired, he could without difficulty have come in touch with the most important individuals and organizations in Europe to the great benefit of India. But maybe that did not interest him so much. Outside India, he had another role to play besides that of a politician, and it is not always easy to play two roles in one person.